All right.
So,
welcome to Valley Bible Studies Podcast.
Yeah, that's us.
It's good to be back. It's good
to be here for the first time, really.
Yeah, well,
the intro counts.
After the intro,
yeah.
It's good to be back in the studio, studying.
If you can call this a studio, which it's our studio.
Like we said,
it's a studio in our hearts.
Yeah, like we said in the intro, it's a closet turned a nursery. Turned AV room, turned AV/security, turned...
It'd be really funny. It'd be a really funny bit if we brought that up in every episode.
Is funny the right word?
Well, it'd be funny to us.
True. So...
We're not that funny.
No. We think we are.
We try.
We are excited to be back in here. We're excited to get started with our study into the New Testament. I'm pumped, man. I don't know about you, but I'm pumped.
It's been a long time since I've actually gone through the New Testament like we're gonna do this year. Like it's been a solid. I took a class called Survey of the New Testament at freshman year.
Dude, what a
at
good
Freed
class!
Hardeman. Yeah, that's a good class.
Who'd you have?
I had Ryan Fraser.
I had the legend himself, Billy Smith.
Yeah, I had Billy for a couple classes, but not that one.
8:30 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Oh, never mind. Billy. No longer cool.
It was still a good class.
I mean, yeah, it's still a good class. But I had that class freshman year, and that's probably the last time I actually went through like each book.
Yeah,
like we're going to this year. So 4 years ago.
I want to apologize. That was not my 8:30 class with Billy Smith. My 8:30 class with Billy Smith was Life of Christ.
That's a different class.
That is a different class.
Still a good class.
Survey of the New Testament, I had my second semester with, what's his name?
David Powell?
Nope. Bald, glasses, super cool
Rick
dude.
Brumback.
No, other bald dude with glasses.
I guess Freed has some patterns. Oh, man.
He's super cool. He's at Horizons. He's one of the main Horizons guys.
Matt Cook.
Shout out Matt Cook.
Good guy.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Like, that was one of...
Everyone we've named so far has been a good guy, but...
Again, pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was... Yeah, Life of Christ with Billy Smith, and then Survey of the New Testament with Matt Cook. Two amazing Bible classes.
That's a solid lineup.
Yeah. Freshman year was stacked.
Anyway, that's the last time that I've done what we're doing this year with VBS and going through like book by book kind of thing.
Yeah, because I mean, other than studying for other Bible classes that we've taught,
right? This
is really the first time I've gone, like you said,
book by book,
Matthew to Mark, Luke, and going through it.
Right.
So very excited about that. Yeah,
especially since we're starting with my favorite. I was going to say the best one, and that's probably not true because they're all the best one. But
yeah, you can't really say this is the best one.
Yeah, there's not a best one.
No.
They're 66 tied for first, but this is my favorite one. Like if I were to pick one to study or to class, Matthew's.
You can have a favorite.
Matthew's my boy. This is, and part of it is like, I'm a big Old Testament nerd to the point that one of the studies that I do, like one of the group studies that I'm involved with in town that meets weekly during the college season, usually when I talk, like there's a segment when I talk at some point that they have named Nerdy Old Testament Time with Luke, because I'm I'm going to bring up something from the Old Testament that
shocker.
Yeah. I know. I'm aware, and I'm confident in it because the Old Testament's cool.
It is. No, I'm not dissing that.
I didn't say you were.
You implied it.
I implied it. Anyway, as a big Old Testament nerd, Matthew is my favorite because it is where the Old Testament comes together. Like,
yeah, with the genealogy. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Well, just the whole book. Like, you go through the whole thing.
It kind of ties it together.
The New Testament is designed in a way that all 39 books of the Old Testament are tied in some way, like to the whole New Testament. And I think Matthew is the book in the New Testament where you can make the biggest argument that all of them are there somewhere. All 39 tie in somewhere.
Yeah.
It's also like, so if you've read the written study that we've made before watching or listening to this podcast,
which can be found on valleybiblestudies.com.
Attaboy. If you've read that, you know that basically the whole study, the idea is Jesus is the Messiah. That is the theme of Matthew. That's the one thing that Matthew, as a Jew writing to Jews, is trying to get across that Jesus is the fulfillment of everything that the Old Testament was and was talking about. He's here. This is the guy. It's time. Yeah. We've been waiting for 1,200 years for this, is basically Matthew's point.
So starting Matthew, it's, what was that? You sent me something. It was a meme or a video, and it was...
I send you a lot, so...
You do send me a lot. It was the guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy.
Oh, the genealogy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, obviously we're prepping to study for this and going into this, and it was, topical.
But the caption was like Matthew's intro, and it's the genealogy, and he's going, I knew this guy who 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 knew this guy's cousin.
Yeah. Who knew Jesus. Yeah. So verses 1 through 17, the genealogy of, where Jesus comes into the picture, where, we get Joseph and where, his descendants. And so it all starts with Abraham, which, like you said, drawing it back, we're going through and we're
starting in Genesis.
And
where it started.
I was telling Luke before we started recording, in my personal book, I legit just did like a serpentine,
whatever.
Yeah.
Either one.
In my book, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth of the genealogy, and it was tedious, but at the same time, I was like, "That's a lot."
Yeah,
I
mean, you're tying the entire Old Testament in there because he starts with Abraham. So Matthew's again a Jew writing to Jews. So he's telling the story of the chosen people. Where does the story of the chosen people start? Well, it starts with Abraham, the father of the faithful. You get the patriarchs, you get down to like Judah and the tribe of Judah going through, and then you get to David. David's big. Actually, if you list the people in the Bible in order of how many times they're mentioned in the Bible, David is second. Like God/Jesus is first, and then David is the second most mentioned guy.
Wow. In
the whole thing. So David...
I underlined him.
Well, that makes sense, yeah. And then all the kings down through David's line, and then you have the exile, and then you get into, like, one of the more interesting things to me is the last few, because it's people we don't know.
Yeah, versus, I think it's like 15.
Yeah, something
14,
like that.
15.
Down through the rest of it. It's just people we've never heard of before. But that's the line that Matthew is drawing, is that even these people that you don't know...
After Zerubbabel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the rest of those guys. Even these people that you don't know are important to the messianic message. Which is a really good point for him to open with. Because you think about, like, his goal is proving that the Messiah is relevant now because Jesus is the fulfillment of everything.
Right.
He's trying to get those average Joe people, in a sense, to come with him and come with Jesus on the journey that the Messiah is taking people on. That's a great point to make there at the first, is that yes, like we have people like Abraham and like David to look up to, but we're also looking up to the people whose names we don't remember. The people whose names that we've forgotten a long time ago, but they're still important because they brought us Jesus. That's a great message to have.
Yeah. And so it takes us to verses 18 through 22, which talks about Jesus' birth.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming
Joseph's
off
perspective.
Joseph's perspective, yes. So you got to think, poor Joseph, man. He goes in.
You want to talk about not signing up for this,
right? Hey, Mary, how are you? Hey, I'm pregnant.
What? Huh?
Well,
what?
We didn't. So how do you?
Yeah.
When do you?
Yeah.
Huh.
Also, you could get stoned for that.
Yeah.
Like in Deuteronomy, it talks about, like, if you get married and you find out once you get married that this is the situation,
right?
Whoever's the cause of the situation, they die.
Yeah. Joseph brings Mary a pie and she says, "Honey, where'd you get this?" "Oh, I baked it in the oven." "Oh, but we don't have an oven." You see, Mary, where this doesn't add up. Joseph's a little perplexed. He's a little taken back.
Okay, but to his credit, the text also says, because he was a noble man, He wanted to put her away quietly.
He wanted to make sure that
you can make a big stink about it. You can get to the point where she could be stoned if people misunderstand or misrepresent this.
Right.
But he's a good guy.
But then when clarity hits,
as in an angel shows up.
As when the angel shows up and tells him, hey, it's the Holy Spirit. That's how she's pregnant.
He still takes responsibility.
He does.
Because, they're not married yet. He could leave.
He could. And because
he doesn't.
I'll say this, consummate the marriage until after Jesus is born.
Right.
What a guy.
Yeah.
What a guy. And so when you look at it from his perspective of, man, what do you do?
Right.
It's, like you said, noble.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those verses 18 through 22, talking about Jesus' birth, there's a few things that we note. You and I didn't talk about this before we started recording.
Go for it.
I'd like to talk about it.
Yeah, go for it.
It doesn't say when. Most research and historical
scholarship
findings say that it was probably in spring.
Yeah, because there are shepherds keeping watch over their flocks.
And that would make sense.
That's not going to happen in December.
It's not. And so it doesn't tell us when. Doesn't tell us how many wise men Herod sent.
Mm-mm. Well, Herod didn't send them. Doesn't tell us how many showed up.
Right.
Also,
Herod had an agenda, though, but we'll get to that.
But also, the wise men show up like several months after Jesus is born. Because when Herod decides to try and kill all the babies in Judah to try and, get rid of Jesus by just doing a blanket sweep.
Which, that's smart, but
right, well, yeah. But there's another thing in Matthew chapter 2 that I wanted to get into, just for a little bit.
Okay, so the main points, verses 1 through 12, the wise men come from the east.
Yes.
Okay. And when Herod hears of Jesus' birth.
Right. Okay, so this is what I want to get into. So,
rocket. Go.
This is Matthew's the book where all of the Old Testament comes together. Correct. So, there's a prophet called Obadiah. He's one of the minor prophets. He's the shortest minor prophet.
Heard of him.
It's the shortest book in the Old Testament. And basically for like 20-something verses, Obadiah says, Edom is the worst, and they're going to get what's coming to them. So Edom is Esau's people. If you go all the way back to Genesis, you've got Jacob. Jacob is renamed Israel. Jacob is where the Israelites come from. Esau, his other name is Edom. That's where the Edomites come from. So there's this other nation that's sort of distant cousins of the Israelites that lives in the same area. But they're not part of the covenant people. They don't worship Yahweh, so they're a totally separate thing, and often an enemy of the Israelites. And Obadiah says in his prophecy, you're getting what's coming to you. Because you haven't worshiped God, because you haven't respected Israel as the covenant people, you're getting what's coming to you, eventually. So you get to Herod. Herod's dad was also named Herod. This is Herod the Great. This is the guy who establishes the Herodian monarchy, which is one of the powers during the life of Jesus, and they have a whole system in Palestine. Herod the Great is the first one of those. Herod's dad, before they became monarchs, was also named Herod. And Herod's dad, Herod Sr., his name, he was called Herod the Idumean. Idumean is the Roman spelling of Edomite. So Herod the Great, the one who tries to kill Jesus, is an Edomite. And Herod the Edomite was raised in Ashkelon. Ashkelon was one of the 5 great cities of the Philistines, Philistia. So Herod and the Herodian monarchy are Edomite pretenders steeped in Philistine culture. You want to talk about starting with a bad guy.
If that's not a recipe for disaster.
Exactly.
I don't know what is.
Right. But like when you see the name Herod, that's what you're supposed to think is these are pretenders, they are illegitimate, they are enemy rulers, but exerting power over the covenant people. But Obadiah's prophecy way back when said, you're getting what's coming to you. Mm-hmm. Why do you think Herod is so desperate to kill Jesus, he's willing to kill babies throughout Judah? Because he knows Edom has to eventually get what's coming to them. Mm. I'm teaching Matthew here at Westside in the spring in our adult class, and I put that together for the first time like 2 weeks ago, and
you seem excited.
I flipped.
Yeah, you
because there's this line that goes all the way from Genesis to Matthew. And
I can see the light bulb right on top of your head where it kind of clicked, and you're like, dude, check this out.
Yeah.
So in that, I mean, honestly, that tracks.
Yeah.
So Herod secretly sends the wise men.
Mm-hmm.
In verse, I think it's 7. Yeah, in verse 8, he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go search carefully for the young child, and when you found him, bring back word to me." So that, and here's the thing, like blatant lie. Herod says, "So that I can worship him too."
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. And
whatever you say, Chief.
And so the wise men are like, "Yep, let's do it." They go down. They follow the star. They find him. We don't know how long that took. Months, maybe up to a year.
And then it says they were warned in a vision.
They were warned in a vision.
To go back a different way.
Yeah, and so they see that, and they're like, "Oh, snap." So the wise men dip. At some point in time, probably a few months, maybe about another year later, Herod finds out that they're not going to come back. He's angered, and he's going to do what he wanted to do originally, but now he has to do it a little bit more genocidally, right?
Yeah.
To where any boy 2 years or younger
is killed
in Judea is sentenced to death.
Mm.
Luckily,
and the solution is we're going to Egypt.
Yeah. So luckily, Joseph receives that vision from the angel saying, "You need to leave. You need to go to Egypt."
I have a theory about this too.
Oh boy.
And there's absolutely nothing on the face of the text that says this, but this is just...
So we're going to put a big old asterisk on
asterisk, this is Luke's brain. So, what are the 3 gifts that the wise men bring? Which, by the way, this is why most people assume that there were 3, because there were 3 gifts. We don't know how many men there were.
Gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What do you think pays for a journey to Egypt and back for a small town from Nazareth people who have nothing?
I bet that went a long way.
Probably so.
Probably the gold more than anything, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, all 3, because spices are big back in.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's just my little fan theory, but...
That would track. That would make sense.
Because, I mean...
We have no textual proof of that, but...
Yeah, but
Luke's big brain...
They still move back to Nazareth.
Luke's big brain is putting 2 and 2 together.
Nazareth is poor. Poor enough that it's one of the towns back in 1 Kings that one of Solomon's buddies... Like, Solomon gives one of his buddies Galilee as a gift, and his buddy sends it back. He's like, "This is garbage. Why would you give me this?"
I appreciate it, but I'm gonna return to sender.
Yeah, that's where Jesus grows up.
Right. Wolf.
Humility.
Yeah.
You want to talk about humbling himself to the point of a man.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like, not only is he a man, he is poor.
So they flee to Egypt. Keyword in that flee. Like, they
have to book it.
They gotta go. And so it was like the next day.
Yeah.
Joseph packs up that stuff.
If they didn't start like overnight.
Right, like Joseph wakes up from his sleep.
We gotta go.
And is like, "Hey, okay, don't know what time it is, but we're leaving. Time to dip." And so they flee to Egypt. And when they go, eventually, so they stay in Egypt. They stay in Egypt until Herod dies. And then when Herod dies, they get another, Joseph receives another vision from the angel saying, "Hey,
go back to Nazareth.
You're good. You're good. You're good." So goes back to Nazareth. We see that in verse 23. And then, so now we're heading into chapter 3. Okay. And this is where Jesus gets baptized. John is kind of like leading the way. He's setting.
He's the Elijah that is to come.
Right. He's setting the stage. Because he even tells them...
Again, this is all the Old Testament coming back. Because first you've got Elijah, who was powerful prophet, lived by a river, opposed the ruling masses, did whatever it took to prepare the way for people to come back to God.
Yeah.
And you have the minor prophets and Isaiah and other people saying, Elijah's going to come back. Now, there were some people who were thinking, is Elijah actually... Like, is it going to be Elijah that comes back? But no, John the Baptist is... has the spirit of Elijah, and he's now preparing the way again.
And so with this preparation, he begins to baptize, right? So he's baptizing. We see this in verse 11. I indeed baptize you with water unto repentance, but he who is coming after me is mightier than I, whose sandals I am not worthy to carry. And I can only assume that people, when they hear this, are kind of like, huh?
Right. If you're Elijah...
They're like, what? You mean there's someone better?
Cooler than Elijah.
Right. And so, like, by John saying there's somebody who's like, sandals I'm not worthy to carry.
That's the equivalent of, I'm not worthy to be in the same room as this guy.
Right. And so people, I can only imagine, were incredibly confused, but also probably pretty anxious. They're like, whoa, that's awesome. Right. And so that leads us into the end of that verse 11, saying that he baptizes. So at the beginning of verse 11, I baptize you with water unto repentance. What he's going to do at the end of verse 11 is he's going to baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that hasn't been heard of. That's something that hasn't been possible. And so now, not only are they going to be, curious, anxious, excited, but
a little nervous.
Yeah.
What's about to happen?
They don't know.
Right.
And so when you approach that kind of situation, I mean, this happens today. If you approach a situation where you are completely blind, you have no clue what it's about, you don't know what's going to happen.
Especially when it affects something so central to you as your faith.
Right.
Like, there are people at Westside and the other congregations, when we started Valley Bible Studies, that asked me, and it wasn't that they didn't support what we're doing or anything, but just the fact that this is brand new for us, there were people who are a little hesitant to jump on the wagon.
It's just
which understandable. It's just new.
You just don't know.
Right.
And that brings
that's why John is here. Because John is introducing familiarity. Everybody knew Elijah. John looks a lot like Elijah, but now John can say something like this, but better and new, is coming.
Because there is that certain level of fear that people are going to have.
Right.
With uncertainty and not knowing, there is a certain level of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And John is... I'm sure there are people that were really scared, but I'm also sure that there were probably people that were really excited. Like John's probably pumped.
Oh, yeah.
And
the apostles. Some of the apostles start as John's followers, and then he points them over when Jesus shows up.
Yeah.
So they've got to be pumped.
And so, but then it really capitalizes it in verse 13. 13 through 17, right? Where John baptizes Jesus.
Mm.
I can't imagine what was running through John's head, because go back a couple back verses.
I don't deserve to
be in the same room.
Guy,
I don't deserve to be associated with him. I can't carry his sandals. No. And then he says, I need you to baptize me.
Right. The magic of Jesus's story is, I don't deserve to be involved in it. And it's when I realize that I don't deserve to be involved in it that I'm ready to be involved.
Yeah. And amen. So in verse 14, John's like, hey, pal, pump the brakes.
Are you sure?
Okay.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah. He even says, I need to be baptized by you. What do you mean I'm going to baptize you? You need to baptize me.
Mm.
And Jesus...
Maybe this is why Jesus starts his ministry here, because he starts his ministry with one of the best examples of how to respond to Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, his first public appearance, and John is already, I don't deserve to be near you. You want me to baptize you? You've obviously got this backwards, because I'm not worthy to look at you, much less participate in your ministry with you. And Jesus says, that's exactly why I want you.
Yeah. Yep.
Because you recognize that you're not the Messiah and I am.
And the point is to fulfill all righteousness.
You can't...
Boom.
Which the message is, you can't be righteous and prideful. You can't be righteous without that acknowledgement that Jesus is so far beyond me. I am just lucky to be anywhere near him doing anything he asks me to do. That's what righteousness, that's where it starts.
Yep.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, Proverbs.
And so now, with that righteousness set in place, we got it. Jesus is baptized. The sky splits. Hear a heavenly voice.
You have a meeting of the Trinity.
Yeah, you have a yeah.
Jesus is there. The Spirit comes down, and the Father speaks.
Right.
This is my Son. There's a meeting of
who
the Trinity.
I am well pleased.
Right.
Now imagine being a bystander in that scenario, and you're just kind of the
what?
Did you hear that too?
This is some weird thunder.
Right. And to be in that moment, man. But that leads us, with that righteousness being fulfilled, that leads us to Jesus being tempted.
Mm-hmm.
Thrice. And in our meditation Monday, in the last one, yeah, shout out to Luke. I've only been to one just because that's the only one I was able to go to, just because of my schedule. Dude, dope session. That's so cool.
We have some really cool. So basically, it's just a roundtable discussion class that we have once a month where we're going through Hebrews right now, but just show up with a copy of Hebrews and we'll talk about it.
Right.
And we're going verse by verse, so it's slow.
Yeah.
We're just now starting chapter 3, we started in July.
I think we finished 4 verses.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's about average.
Yeah.
So it's slow, but man, is it good.
It's deep.
Yeah.
It's very in depth. And one of the things that we discussed was Jesus being tempted, right? And so to set the stage for this, Jesus has been in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights.
And then you get the greatest understatement in the entire Bible. And he was hungry.
The man didn't eat.
You think?
The man didn't eat. Okay?
Thank you, Matthew, for clearing that up.
Yeah. Way to be blunt. And so, 40 days, 40 nights, we see that in verses 1 through 2 of chapter 4. He didn't eat, so he's starving. Satan sees his opportunity, and he takes it. And the first thing he tempts him with, you want some bread?
Which sounds kind of dumb. Like, if you think about it in comparison to the other two, like the second thing he offers him is, you can prove to the entire world that you're the Messiah. And the third thing that he offers him is, you can just own the world and make them believe you're the Messiah.
Yeah, quite a jump.
Right. It's quite a jump if you don't put together the fact that Jesus is starving.
Yeah. And that's why it's the first. You know, like, hey, let's go for the easy one. This guy's hungry.
But here's the other thing about it, right? If you picture Jesus and his job, his goal, his only plan is get to the cross. Get to the cross the right way. Do it the right way to redeem mankind.
And you're going to sacrifice all that for some bread.
Well, but here's Satan's play. You never get to the cross if you starve to death first.
You said that in the Meditation Monday.
I did.
You did.
But it's a good point.
It is.
That's Satan's play. If you want to do this the right way.
So here, I got you some bread, man. You want a bite? It's good. Let me tell you right now, that's where I would have caved. 40 days and 40 nights and I haven't had anything, and this guy brings me some bread. I don't care if it's stale.
I don't think I've gone without eating for 40 hours in my life.
The longest fast that I've ever done was 72 hours.
Wow.
It was tough.
I did 24 once, but I've never done longer than that.
It brought up a lot of different awareness to me, to where you need food, but you also you can power through. Yeah, you can.
The human body is a lot stronger than we give it credit for sometimes.
Right. And so now I was really stupid because I capped it off with playing basketball for 2 hours. I thought I was going to collapse. I didn't, but I don't know. It gave me a lot of different perspective on the fact that hey, I did this for 3 days and I didn't die.
Yeah.
But I also did this for 3 days and I am starving.
Yeah.
And so it gives you that perspective of while I think I'm strong, can't do anything without
So
him.
Jesus is in this position.
40 days.
40 days.
40 nights.
Yours times 12 or something. 12 or 13. Yikes.
Yeah. There's no way I could have done it.
But imagine how much perspective Jesus gains from that. Because you think about everything that Jesus is going to have to go through for 3 years.
Yeah.
Even before he gets to the cross. Everyone's going to hate him. He's going to be basically homeless. He's going to be in need basically in every way that you can possibly be in need. It says the Spirit takes him out into the wilderness. So where does God start him in his ministry to prepare for all the rest of that?
Right.
It's by reminding him, you can do this.
Yeah. And this really gives us perspective as Christians that he was tempted in ways that we are too.
Mm-hmm. Everybody gets hangry.
Yeah. Yeah. I was this morning.
I know.
Thanks. And so we go through those things. We go through the pride of life. We want things and we want to be acknowledged.
We all want to be seen.
We all want to, when we accomplish something or when we do something, we want someone to say, hey man, good job. We want to be seen. We want to be noticed. We want to be heard. Mm-hmm. And Satan goes after Jesus with these things. Mm-hmm. You shall not tempt the Lord your God. And
his tricks have been the same since the beginning.
And they will continue to be the same.
And the solution has been the same since the beginning.
Absolutely. And so Jesus stands firm. And it's the fact that in his human form he was tempted, but again stood firm. Why can't we?
Right. All right, so
yes, moving forward because
37 minutes down and 4 chapters down. We got 24 more.
So let's go into
let's Sermon on the Mount.
Let's go into the Sermon on the Mount.
Because I say Matthew is my favorite book. The Sermon on the Mount is my favorite anything.
Let's see why.
Anything at all. Because I have the textual background. Exegesis is my thing. It's what I do. It's what I love to do. It's what I do. And I mean, it's hard to imagine a richer and a deeper and a more sensible text than the Sermon on the Mount. Because it just makes sense. Like when he says stuff like, the eye is the lamp of the body. This is 6:22, I think. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is light, your whole body will be full of light. If your eye is dark, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if the light in you is darkness, you're in trouble. That last bit is me. But
that's the problem.
But he says, how great is that darkness? That's so true. Like whatever I'm looking at decides how I feel. It decides what I'm thinking about. Ultimately, it decides who I'm going to be in that moment. Whatever I've made my focus.
Yeah, it dictates your attitude.
Right. That's just how life works. Ask and it'll be given to you. That's just how life works.
Seek and you shall find.
It's just how life works.
Yep.
And there's the two roads. Like this road leads to life, and it's super hard, but it's rewarding. This road leads to death, but it's super, super easy and big, and everybody goes down it. What decision are you going to make?
Yeah.
That's just how life works.
All right, so break this down for us, my man.
What, the Sermon on the Mount?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and give us the Spark Notes version.
Yeah. So,
a couple things that we really want to get into that we're going to discuss.
We got a couple special topics post Sermon on the Mount we want to talk about. But in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, first little bit, I think of verses 1 through 20 as the thesis statement main idea. Because the Beatitudes come first, and he says, you have to be humbled in these ways and recognize your need in these ways in order for the rewards of God to come to you. Once you've done that, 2 things can happen. A, you can become the light of the world and the salt of the earth that you were meant to be. And B, you'll recognize that I, Jesus says, am the fulfillment of the law. Which is, again, Matthew's point. Jesus is the fulfillment of everything. It's only when I recognize that I can't be the fulfillment of things for myself that I can open up to the possibility of Jesus is the fulfillment of things for me. And that's where the rest of the sermon comes from, is that idea. So the rest of chapter 5 is reevaluating the law. You've heard this. I'm telling you this. He's not saying that the law was wrong. He's saying that the way you've interpreted that law on physical terms doesn't hold up. Like, yes, the physical reality is there, but there's a spiritual reality behind that we also need to tackle. It's not just about murder, it's about hate. It's not just about adultery, it's about lust. It's not just about oaths, it's about honesty. All of these things have a spiritual reality behind them that dictates how they work.
Right. It's not while the outcome is important, it's why the outcome
start at the heart.
Right. Where did this idea come from?
Right.
Why did you do it?
Right.
Yeah.
Chapter 6. First half of chapter 6 is when you do good works. Now that's important because he doesn't say if you do good works.
Yep.
He's assuming that the kind of people that he's looking for do good works. That's a prerequisite.
But then it's also why.
When you do good works, don't do it to be seen by people. When you fast, don't do it to be seen by people. When you pray, don't do it to be seen by people. Do it because you have a relationship with God that motivates you to do it, and an estimation of people as worthy of value and respect that motivates you to do it.
Because I can tell you right now, in any sort of relationship, if you do something for the other person, and there are two different ways that it can happen. One, because they asked you to, and then you did it. Or two, you did it because you wanted to do it.
Right.
If you do it because they asked you to, it's not really because you loved them. It's not really because you care to. It's just you're listening.
Right.
And the person that asks, they're not going to. It's not going to be the same.
Right.
But if you do it because you care, you do it because they didn't ask you to.
Mm-hmm.
You do it because you want to make them happy.
Right.
Man, that goes a far way in a relationship.
Exactly. And then, so that's the first half. Second half, starting in verse 19, is when you think that way, like when it's not about gain for you, it's about gain for God and for the other person. When that's your focus, you don't have to worry about it. Like that, this is the segment where he says, look at the birds. They don't worry about it. They still got everything. Look at the flowers. They don't worry about it. They still got everything. So why do you get so caught up in worry? It's because you're still focusing on gain for yourself. When my focus changes to, I want to glorify God and I want to do what's good for other people, worry goes away. That's just how it works. And then chapter 7 is basically the two ways concept. Like, there's a way to do this right and there's a way to get this wrong. You could get it wrong by being a hypocrite and by saying, let me take the speck out of your eye when you got a 2x4 sticking out of yours. You could get this wrong by wanting everything to be easy. Sometimes that looks like not asking for things and just assuming they'll come to you. Sometimes it looks like following the crowd down the big road. You could get it wrong by building on the wrong foundation. Because there's a foundation of rock, Jesus says that's my word, and doing it. There's a foundation of sand, and that's either not knowing my word or knowing it and not doing it. You can get it wrong in a lot of ways, but Jesus consistently says, I am the way to get it right. A relationship with me is the way to get it right. That's sort of the exclamation point at the end, and it's at the end of the sermon, the crowds say, this guy knows what's up. He's teaching with authority. He's teaching not only as if he knows this stuff, but as if he actually lives out and does and believes this stuff. That makes a big difference. It's I could talk about the Sermon on the Mount for I could make a podcast just about this, I think. But
I mean, you're about to do an entire class.
I know, yeah.
On it. Which, by the way, very much looking forward to.
Matthew or the Sermon on the Mount?
Yes.
Well, yeah.
For just to put this out there, those who are not members at Westside, if you are able to, go to Westside's YouTube channel when Luke starts that class in the spring.
Starting in March, we're doing a class on Matthew,
yes.
Which is part of why we've been terrible and taken up so much time on the first 7 chapters is because I've got it on my mind so much.
Yeah. Well, there's also a lot to discuss.
Well, yeah.
But
it's going to be tough.
Starting in March, Luke's going to be teaching a class in the auditorium. It's going to be recorded. It's going to be put on YouTube. Check it out. I'm really excited.
Matthew.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm going to be in that class, so pumped.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that I want to discuss from just two things from the Sermon on the Mount, just to provide a little bit of clarity.
Sure.
And they're kind of harsh realities, but it's reality.
Right. Well, that's the thing about the Sermon on the Mount. He makes no apologies.
Right.
This is just the way things are.
Absolutely. And so one of those things you can find in verse 31 and 32. And it's talking
Of
about...
5?
Yes, of chapter 5. Thank you. So in chapter 5, verse 31 and 32, furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, Jesus says, I say to you, that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. We live in a world where that is A-okay.
Right. Well, divorce is just such a reality now.
It is.
It's just something that everybody knows about.
Right. And
which isn't really right.
I mean, and I don't know if the stat
all.
I don't know if the stat is actually like 100% accurate of 55% of marriages into divorce.
But I'd believe it.
Yeah, I mean, it might be up there. Which, that's terrible. Most marriages, and then what's the statistic that most marriages, if they are going to be divorced, the most likely it's going to be in the first 5 years?
Mm-hmm. It's something like 2/3 of...
Dude, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I didn't think it was true. I've seen it. It is wild. Because, I mean, we're, or at least I'm at that point. So, Sid and I just celebrated this past summer 5 years of marriage. And, and it's, I get it. It's hard. Around 4 to 5 years of marriage, it's tough, man. But you married that person for a reason. It's a lifelong commitment. It's a bond with God that cannot and should not be broken.
Well, that's the thing about it. The reason that marriage is so commonplace to people now is they've taken God out of the equation. If it's just two people signing up for something, it like you could sign a lease on a house.
It's a relationship.
But this is a commitment before God and each other.
And that's what's being forgotten. And the other thing that's being forgotten is the bounds in which, or the boundaries in which you can get married again.
Mm-hmm.
If you get divorced in a way that is not okay with God, which is the other person.
Every way but one.
That's it. There's only one way, and it's the other person commits adultery. Or one person commits adultery.
Yeah.
And if that person, so the person that commits adultery, and there's a divorce, the person that commits adultery cannot get married again. I.e., they can't really be in a relationship with someone else.
Right. Because, I mean, that's, if you think about it from God's perspective, which I'm not claiming to be an expert at, but if you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense. I've given you the opportunity to engage in the greatest relationship between two people that you can, that has ever existed, and you blew it. And you blew it in like the biggest way you can blow it.
But what happens a lot is that you'll have someone who doesn't get married, or they do get married, there's a scriptural divorce, they were married and they lost their spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Later on down the road, they find somebody. And they can get married because in God's eyes, everything has gone the way that he said it can.
Right.
But then that person that they fall in love with, they had a marriage. And it was unscriptural. Luke 16, not you.
I'm 22.
Luke chapter 16, verse 18. If anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. We've established that. The man who marries a divorced woman, so someone who marries somebody else who has been divorced unscripturally, is committing adultery.
Yes.
And that's so hard for people to...
That's tough.
It's tough
because it seems unfair.
It does, because you're like, I love this person. God doesn't want me to be happy.
And it's been years, since either of our situations. It's been however many years. We're different people than we were.
That was something. Maybe the person that I've fallen in love with, they were young and dumb, and they got married, and it didn't work out.
But it all goes back to God's estimation of marriage. Marriage is not something that you just get into and get out of.
It's not this finicky thing that's
right.
That you can just.
It's not up to court documents.
No, it's
a sacred relationship.
And so you are in this position where you have fallen in love, and you don't see it. It's not fair. Guess what? It might not be fair to you. But you have created a bond. You have made it a relationship. You have made it a point with God. And you've made that commitment. And he says you can make that commitment. And I'm fine with this commitment. But if you break this commitment,
what God has joined together, let no man separate. That's what Jesus says.
And I know it's hard, but that's what God wants. And people see it as unfair. They fall in love. I get that. And that's one of those things where you don't fully understand it until you're in that scenario. And it's a lot easier outside looking in.
Right.
But that's the reality of it. The other thing I wanted to discuss,
with the 2 minutes we have left.
With the 2 minutes that we have left. Judgment.
Which really we're on negative 5 minutes, but go ahead.
Judgment. Not judgment at the end of the time on earth.
But judging other people.
Judge
not that you be not judged.
Judge not that you be not judged.
Which is one of the most taken out of context and turned into whatever you want it to be verses ever.
Correct.
And I admit that I've done it before, sometimes as a joke, but I admit fault on this point.
So, take the plank out of your own eye. Right? Don't call out the speck in somebody else's eye until you can take that plank out of yours.
Right.
A lot of people will say, they use the righteous judgment.
Right.
I'm
doing this because God said so.
Right. And that's
a dangerous game to play.
And that leads to the whole
how direct is your line to God that you can say that?
It casts that perspective of the holier than thou. And a lot
makes that very easy.
It does. And so people are, I'm not holier than thou. I see you doing wrong.
Right.
There's a fine line with that, man. Mm-hmm. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of
gentleness.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have to defend truth.
Yes.
You have to. Don't read Ephesians 6 and then try and argue that you're not supposed to defend truth.
Right.
You're wearing armor for a reason. But
here's the thing.
You defend truth without attacking people.
Gentleness.
Right.
Gentleness. Right. Keep watch on yourself lest you too be tempted. Right. But tempted with what?
Tempted to attack the person.
Tempted to, because not, and you can look at this from a couple different lenses, but you're like, yeah, you could be tempted with that same thing, or you could being tempted on, like you said, attacking that person. Because here's the thing, the sin really lies with, again, what's in your heart.
Right.
Are you pointing out someone's transgression because you want to help them?
Right.
Or are you pointing out someone's transgression because it's an aha, gotcha.
And here's the thing that people do. When, let's say,
what's the justification?
I, as a Christian, see something wrong with someone, see someone living in sin.
If that makes you happy.
And I come to them and I say, hey, I don't want to, I'm just looking out for you. This is something that I know, and I may be wrong. There may be something going on here that I don't know. But if I see something that looks like an issue and I try and defend it, if the next thing that's thrown back at me is, judge not that you be not judged. They're saying, you can't judge me because God says not to judge people. I'm not judging you. I'm judging the situation that you're in, hoping that you, like, I still have faith in you that you will correct,
right,
and that you'll behave in the best way that you can. But I have to defend the truth.
Right.
It's my duty to defend the gospel that Jesus gave me.
In defending the truth, you are judging the action, not the person. Because guess what? It is not our job to judge the person.
Right.
It has never been, nor will it ever be
That's
our
God.
judge. Yeah, our jobs to judge someone else.
That's God.
That is God's job at the end of time on Judgment Day.
It's almost like there's a day named for this.
Yeah, tell me about it. And so when, like, that's what people get caught up in, man. They're judging people. They're judging that person because of what they've done. I don't want you hanging around that person. I don't want to be associated with that person. You don't want to be associated with that person? I wouldn't want to be associated with the thing that they're doing.
Right.
Not necessarily the person. And so it's that approach, man. It's that attitude in which people judge. Judging is fine, but what are you judging?
Right.
If you are judging the action, if you are judging the transgression, yeah, we're told to do that.
Right.
If you are judging the person, shame on you.
And shame on us because, I mean, everybody's guilty of this to some degree.
It's so hard to do.
Right.
With so much stuff that happens in this world, with so much stuff that
it's so easy to see somebody that's obviously living in sin. Like, it's just, you can see it on them.
And it's so easy
to just say, what a bum.
I know, and it's so easy to elevate yourself.
Uh-huh. I would never.
Yeah. You're like, well, that stinks. I would never do that.
But one of the messages of Jesus is, you may never do that, but what have you done today that they would never do?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about that introspection and keeping watch on yourself.
Yep.
So that you're not tempted to say, I would never. Because you may never do that.
But what would you?
But what would you do? What have you done?
Yep.
And on that note,
so that was just something I wanted to point out.
Yeah,
something I wanted us to discuss, because that's one of those things that it's a hard conversation to have, but it's reality.
Right.
It's something that needs to be discussed. We really, really, really appreciate you hanging in there with us.
Our bad.
Yeah. So
there are 21 more chapters.
Woo.
You can find those covered on the Bite-Sized Bible Study and Family Bible Study that are now on the page of valleyibiblestudies.com.
Yeah. I will say that the podcast isn't for us to go through the entire book.
Right.
It's for us to hit topics that we want to discuss about, from the book. And
it just so happens that
to give
chapters 5 through 7 are like the theme of everything.
Yeah.
So.
But we appreciate you hanging in. We appreciate you listening, and we look forward to talking to you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks when we go
See you
over
in Mark.
Mark. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.